At some point, a question arrived that was harder than it should have been. Which parts of me are actually mine? Not which parts were formed by experience. Not which parts were shaped by the people around you. Not which parts emerged from circumstances you didn't choose. But which parts, underneath all of that, are genuinely, recognizably, irreducibly you. This is about that question, and why asking it might be one of the bravest things you ever do. Most people never ask this question, not because they don't care about who they are, but because the question itself feels destabilizing. If you pull at the thread, if you start examining which parts of you are genuine and which parts are simply well-practiced, you risk discovering that more of you than you expected is the second thing. And that discovery can feel like loss, like finding out that the home you've been living in was built on borrowed materials. But here is what the question also makes possible. The beginning of knowing what you are, actually building toward, not what you were shaped into, not what the rooms required, but what you would choose if choosing were fully available to you. The confusion usually arrives in a quiet moment. Not a crisis, not a breakdown, just a pause, a moment when you catch yourself doing something, saying something, reacting to something, and for the first time in a long time, you wonder, is this actually what I think? Or is this what I learned to think? Is this preference genuinely mine? Or did I absorb it from someone whose approval mattered so much that their preferences became easier to adopt than to question? Is this reaction coming from something real in me? Or from a pattern so old, so practiced, that it operates almost below the level of choice? The confusion is not comfortable, but it is important because it is the first sign that something in you is starting to ask a better question than the ones you have been living inside. The reason this question is difficult is not that the answer is hidden. It is that the categories themselves are harder to separate than they first appear. Because the self is not divided cleanly into authentic and adapted. Some things that began as adaptation have been practiced long enough that they have become genuinely yours. Some things that feel most essentially you were shaped so early by such powerful forces that the shaping itself is part of who you are. And some things, the most interesting ones, are both real and adapted simultaneously, genuine responses to genuine experiences. So the question is not a simple sorting exercise. It is not. This is real, this is not. It is something more nuanced. Something more like, where did this come from? Does it still serve me? And if I could choose it again, freely, without pressure, without the weight of everything that formed it, would I? The answer doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in small moments, scattered, often unexpected. The moment you express an opinion and feel something settle in you. A rightness, a recognition that tells you this one is yours, not performed, not borrowed, just true. The moment you notice a preference you didn't know you had. Something small, a kind of food, a type of conversation, a way of spending an afternoon, something that produces a quiet but unmistakable sense of, yes, this. The moment you feel something, anger, or grief, or joy, and recognize it as genuinely yours, rather than a reaction you have been trained to have. These moments are small. They are easy to dismiss, but they are the answer arriving in the only form it is able to arrive, one recognition at a time. When you start asking which parts of you are actually yours, you are not dismantling yourself. Even though it can feel that way. What you are actually doing is beginning to separate the self from the strategy, the person from the protection. You are starting to notice the difference between choices that come from you, from your actual preferences, your genuine values, your real sense of what matters, and choices that come from the patterns you inherited, the adaptations you built, the strategies that kept you safe in rooms that required them. And that noticing, slow, imperfect, happening in small moments rather than grand revelations, is not confusion. It is the beginning of authorship, of a life that is being chosen rather than simply lived inside whatever shape it inherited. When you start to know which parts of you are actually yours, something shifts in how you move through the world. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually. You begin to notice when a choice is coming from you, and when it is coming from the habit of being what someone else needed. You begin to feel the difference between a preference and an accommodation, between a boundary and a performance of one, between saying something you mean and saying something that has simply always been said in this particular room. And with that noticing, even without immediately changing anything, comes a new relationship with yourself. One that is less automatic, less inherited, more chosen. Not perfect, not complete, but beginning. If you have started asking which parts of you are actually yours, I want you to know that the confusion this brings is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that you are finally taking your own interior life seriously enough to examine it. That you have moved from living inside a self to asking questions about it. And that shift, however uncomfortable, however disorienting, is the beginning of something that matters. You do not have to have all the answers yet. You do not have to know, right now, which parts are yours and which parts were borrowed. You only have to stay curious, to keep noticing the small moments when something settles in you and says, yes, this one is mine. Because those moments, small as they are you finding your way back to yourself, one recognition at a time.